house, we speak both Vietnamese and English at home with the girls, but naturally it's more English than Vietnamese. But I immigrated to the US when I was about 5 years old, but my husband was born and raised in the US, so our levels of Vietnamese are quite different. But it's always been very important for both of our families that we learn Vietnamese, know about our culture, and now that we're parents, we finally understand why our parents kept saying "Nói tiếng Việt," which means speak Vietnamese. Um, and so for us, it's really important for our girls to have some kind of knowledge and understanding and appreciation of our roots and our heritage, which makes it even more important to keep the Vietnamese language a part of their everyday lives. Living in the US, like they're going to have countless exposure to English in their everyday interactions. And so that makes it even more important to have some level of exposure to Vietnamese at home and within the community so that that language doesn't get lost. So we support our girls' language development by just integrating Vietnamese words into our everyday conversations. So, for example, we'll say phrases like "sit down" or "ngồi xuống," or eat and ăn cơm and things like that into just everyday conversations that we have with them, and that allows them to make the connection between the English words and the Vietnamese words, and they can make the connection between the two languages. I think repetition is super important because the more exposure to something that a child has, the more likely they'll remember it and retain it. So not everything has to be in like a formal learning setting. Like it doesn't have to be just in a school or in like a study session or anything like that for it to be impactful. It can be just your regular conversations with your child. But my daughters, I've noticed that they will pick up on like random phrases that I say when I'm just talking, and then they'll repeat it to me afterwards later on. And it's really funny. And, when you don't, even when you don't think that they are listening, they're paying attention and they're learning, and they'll surprise you with things that they remember. So I think it's just really important that it's just something that you do naturally with them. It doesn't have to be like forced. And I think that actually makes it easier for them to kind of enjoy learning the language is when it is done in a more playful and engaging way instead of, just workbooks and after school classes and things like that. One example that I have of just speaking in Vietnamese and then it making an impact is when my daughter was 2. When she was born, I would always sing this Vietnamese prayer to her when we went to bed. It was a song that my grandma used to sing to me. And so it was just something that we did as part of our nighttime routine. And then when she was 2, she randomly started singing it with me. And I was so surprised. I was like, how did you learn this? But it was just from her hearing it over and over again every night. And she just memorized it. And it was just one of those beautiful moments that I'll always remember, that it kind of felt like one of the first moments I was able to like really share my culture and my heritage with her. And it was something that was not planned. And so it made it even more meaningful that I wasn't trying to teach her something. I think that is what you'll find with young learners, is that they will learn even if you're not trying. I think one thing that we try to do with our daughters is just having the exposure, like I said. So my husband and I both grew up in the Midwest, so not a lot of diversity there. We didn't get a lot of exposure to Vietnamese outside of our homes and outside of our church community. And so for me, particularly my grandparents were the first Vietnamese teachers that I had. And so they always said, "Nói tiếng Việt ở nhà thì nói tiếng Việt," which means like when you're at home, you speak Vietnamese. And then you can speak English when you're not at home. And that made me really focus on learning Vietnamese when I was at home in that setting so that I could communicate with my parents, with my grandparents. But the luxury of living in a more diverse community now that we live in California is that Vietnamese doesn't have to be confined to the home. We don't have to worry about our girls not speaking in Vietnamese because they don't want to feel othered, because there are children that look like them and speak like them, um, everywhere. And so it is, I think it's really important that our kids um, feel like it's it shouldn't be like considered like a foreign language learning. It should just be another language that they're learning, and our kids shouldn't be just exposed to these other languages in like formal settings, like sitting down with workbooks and in classes and stuff, where it feels a little bit more like structured. So when we like to integrate our language learning into like just mundane everyday activities and settings so that it feels more natural for them to use both languages whenever they want, and we encourage them to use it interchangeably. I think reading is always such an important teaching tool for any young learner. And it is really one of the first introductions to language that a child can have, to any language. And so when I had my daughter Gemma, we were looking for books, Vietnamese books, to read to her, and I just didn't find very many resources. So that's why I started writing bilingual children's books. And it was a fun way to kind of integrate learning Vietnamese into our everyday like story time. And the magic of bilingualism is that it helps your child like make connections between their two identities. So in our case, they learn about the Vietnamese side and their American side. And so they can learn about concepts. So let's say like colors or numbers, and learn the words in both English and Vietnamese at the same time. And it also helps kind of bridge like generational gaps. Like I've heard from a lot of other families that read our books that, it's nice that their, grandparents that only speak Vietnamese can enjoy these books and read to them. But then the parents who are less knowledgeable or less familiar with Vietnamese, they can still read those books in the English part, and like they can kind of interchangeably enjoy those books in both languages. I always feel like I'm learning new vocabulary and new things when I'm writing the books, and my husband is learning new words too. And so I think reading is one of the big things that we do to kind of help encourage their language development. And it doesn't have to be just specifically bilingual books that you can do this with. We will just read like regular books, and we'll kind of integrate the Vietnamese vocabulary into those books. And so, we'll read something and we'll maybe stop and say, oh, that word is in, con chó is dog in Vietnamese. Or you can ask them questions in Vietnamese to kind of just help spur their like thought development in a different language. Another thing that we like to do, like I said, just focusing on kind of mundane everyday activities, is we go for walks around our neighborhood a lot. And so naturally the girls are just pointing out things that they see. And so we use that as an opportunity to integrate Vietnamese vocabulary as well. So for example, if they see a dog, I'll say like, oh, what is a dog? What is dog in Vietnamese? And they'll say, con chó. And I said, oh yes, con chó. So con chó nói gì? Like, what does a dog say? And they'll say woof woof, so just kind of integrating it into the conversation. I find that using both languages interchangeably in normal conversation really helps them learn in a more like fluid way. And again, emphasizes that it doesn't have to be in a certain setting that you speak Vietnamese, in a certain setting that you speak English.